So we've gone through the idea of the axioms of photography when it comes to exposure and composition and using light. I want to kind of put a finer point on things here in terms of talking about composition, and I'm going to lead this in a way to kind of pique your curiosity in terms of what compositional elements do to come together to tell a story. Much like this incredible photograph here that was taken by Andrew Henderson. Let me give you a little bit of background on Andrew. He's from Connecticut. He's an award-winning photojournalist specializing in portrait photography and documentary storytelling. So this is a guy who specializes in photographing faces, right? He studied photography at the Rochester Institute of Technology and then the Western Kentucky University and then at Syracuse University. And his work's been published in the New York Times, National Geographic, among others. So he's a pretty accomplished photojournalist, especially for how young this guy is. Let's look at some of his work here and talk about it in terms of composition. If you're not familiar yet with the rule of thirds, you will be here if you were to take a tic-tac-toe grid and lay it over the top of this image, two horizontal and two vertical lines, and see where they interconnect. Those interconnections are the main points of interest that you're seeing here within this portrait. If Andrew actually centered this man's face in the frame, it would be static, would not allow room, in fact, for the onlooker in the background that adds more intrigue maybe to what's going on here. The frame has a lot to do with this in terms of how he has this framed up. This is a close-up, maybe even an extreme close-up, because it even crops the chin out. So we're just focusing on that prominent nose, the texture of the mustache, and then the eyes. Then the eyes are doing something pretty remarkable here. He's taken the dominant eye, the one that's looking at the lens of the camera, and he's placed that again on a horizontal line of that rule of thirds. But also toward the center of the image there. It's also in shadow versus the other eye that's in highlight. So there's a lot here for your eye to go through and move on in terms of those compositional factors, not to mention the catch lights in the eyes, the highlight on the skin, the highlight on the nose and the forehead and on the mustache, the silver ring around his little finger there, and to contrast that against what's happening in the background. Truly remarkable image here without knowing what the story is behind it. Something a little bit more monochromatic here on black and white. He's using depth of field to go through and punctuate where the eye is going on this, and it goes right down to the man who's getting his hair cut, to his eyes and his raised eyebrows and that furrowed brow, perhaps indicating that he's not too sure about what's happening with that haircut. The stylist, the girl cutting his hair in the background, she's out of focus in that composition. He's working with a very relative shallow depth of field within this. But the light that he's captured on the fingers, especially the foreground hand that's holding the comb there as they almost kind of claw towards the man's head, and they're center of the frame, but they're right in that top horizontal tic-tac-toe grid as he's putting that together. And then the total cropping of the rest of the man's expression down at the bottom. Again, we might not know everything that's going on here, and I won't drop the other shoe, so to speak, to let you know what's going on here. You can look it up, take a look and see. Nonetheless, it's fascinating how he's gone through and put this together. One last image here, and then I'll leave you be. Now, obviously, you're seeing what the rule of thirds is doing here with that tic-tac-toe grid. But he's breaking the rules a little bit. He's panning his camera over right a little bit more. That puts the frame lines, both the vertical and the horizontal frame line in the upper left-hand corner, that become something that frames the rest of her head out. And then we have the burqa, I don't know if I can call it that, the scarf that's over her head that shrouds her, that becomes a compositional element within this too, punctuated by those eyes, by the skin tones. And then we have that background again that goes off into this shallow depth of field with a highlight on that book, the crossed legs, I'm assuming perhaps of a child in the background there, And again, that intimates that perhaps she might be a mother in that respect. All kinds of things happening within this. Well, these are very strong compositional forces that Henderson uses in all of his stuff, especially the portraiture kinds of things that he's doing, to go through and make it punch. One last thing within this is just the negative space, that darkness that seems to border her and what's happening to the camera right of her within that as well. Okay, just a few ideas for you to take a look at.